So guys, so first of all, welcome to another edition of the Weird Human podcast, our 25th actually. So we've got some fantastic guests again today. As usual, I'm joined by the brilliant Dr. Anthony, but also today I'm joined by the fantastic Darren Smith. I've known Darren for many years, and we've worked together in different organizations around the world, which has been fantastic. Today's question, just to remind you guys, is really how can I be a better negotiator? And before we kind of tackle the question, I'd like to just remind you of kind of the mission statement really for the Weird Human podcast. And that mission statement is really about exploring the extraordinary about the human beings who are around us. And that's a very important point. So it's about making you and really kind of bringing out the extraordinary of being a human being. So Darren, perhaps it would be helpful for the people who are listening just to have a brief introduction from yourself.
So we are MBM. We're also known as the Sticky Learning Guys. We're the guys who want to achieve behavioral change with you because we know that most people go on a one-day training course, come back and do nothing different. So we're the guys that ensure by prodding, poking, doing everything we can, you come back and be the very best version of yourselves. That's me, Anthony.
And that's a great introduction. Dr. Anthony, I can't believe we did a show last week, and that show actually had more than 11,000 views now. So again, massive thanks to Michelle. That was the one around kind of like wealth coaches and kind of like tips around kind of money. So if you want to go back and look at the catalogue, that's an incredible episode. And we also started to delve into kind of relationships and kind of what made relationships. And then, of course, that kind of took us into the path around negotiating, particularly between couples. Dr. Anthony is obviously married to Dr. Michelle in the previous show. And we were basically then, I was the first time I've met his beautiful wife. And we obviously then started to explore kind of, what made their relationship successful. And that kind of brought us to our conversation today. So if I can go back, so Dr. Anthony, love you, my friend.
Well, I hope that Darren can actually then teach me how to negotiate better. I mean, because there's one thing for certain, every man needs to know how to negotiate better, because man, you start seeks love. That's for sure. Darren, how do you negotiate?
How do you know?
Well, I'm starting to feel like I should have some awards on the wall like you've got, because wow, they're very impressive. The first thing that we need to do in answering that question is understand the difference between haggling and negotiation. Now, there are 8 ways to solve a conflict. Haggling's one, negotiation's another. So, Andrew, I know you do this. You've been to the bazaar, the market stalls, and you've haggled for the Ray-Bons, and you started at 40 euros, didn't you?
I mean, that's just an obscene amount of money for those. For the Ray, I'm kind of more in the €2 range, to be fair, Darren.
So we've all been there, haven't we? We're trying to buy these Ray-Bons. We're on holiday, and the guy behind the stall starts at 40 euros. We start at 2, and you meet somewhere in the middle. A valid form of resolving a conflict, but don't kid yourself that it's negotiating. It is not. It is haggling. Now, if you get a chance, Andrew, look up on Google a Monty Python sketch about haggling. It's really brilliant about how to do it. So I love that. But let's come back to negotiating. First thing is to know the difference between the two.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because as soon as you talk about the kind of the Friday market, for me it was the Friday market. So we lived in Kuwait for a long time and brought my children up in Kuwait primarily. And there was a fantastic location called the Friday Market, and there were lots of kind of Ray bonds available, and Oakley bonds and other kind of like sunglasses, let's put it that way, and other kind of curious merchandise, which was always quite fascinating. The challenge I always had was that my daughter was always too quick to kind of like share her position when she was negotiating. So she wanted to buy, she had in her mind a particular pair of Ray-Bans. So she would kind of go into the market and she would find the Ray-Bons that she wanted. And then obviously start to salivate around these Ray-Bons. And of course, my big concern around that was that as he was salivating, I was kind of watching the store owner who was also going, "Wow! Now I've got Dad. Buy the short and curlies. Effectively, I can charge my 40 kind of euros as opposed to the €2 for the Ray-Bons, and it's a nightmare. So I would have to then kind of discreetly grab my daughter and sort of take her away and say, we're going to have to find those Ray-Bons on another store. Yeah, there were other stores, but it was often quite a pain finding them because she had a particular taste in Ray-Bons. So then we would eventually find them. But I would say to her, when you go there, do not show your position. I think that's a really, really important point. So I'm kind of curious, Dr. Anthony, to understand about kind of positional and why we shouldn't really be sort of showing our position when we're negotiating.
Well, it's letting the cat out of the bag. I mean, no one actually goes in with a cat out of the bag up front. Negotiation is about getting to a point where both parties find an amicable agreement. And if you leave the cat out of the bag, that you have no back foot to actually reverse back onto. So it is a gift, it is a skill, and it can be learned. And that's why we're speaking to the master, Darren himself. So Darren, talking about negotiation, how do you negotiate with a 5-year-old? They have their own way and they want it their way. Is there any negotiation? You tell us.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some great advice here.
Oh, Vegas.
Now, bear in mind, Dr. Anthony, I've been negotiating and teaching for 30 years, and I used to run a £1 billion portfolio. And I've learned one thing: you don't negotiate with kids. You won't win. I don't win. I've never won with my kids. It's just not worth it. So what I do is I put all my energies into winning at work.
That's a great question. So how do we get better then? So how do we, as human beings, how do we get better at negotiating? So what are your kind of top tips, Darren?
So the first thing is, let's understand the difference between haggling and negotiation. So once we've got those, we're then negotiating. Okay, the next thing on negotiation is preparation. Now, Andrew, what you do, or others do for preparing for a negotiation, is they normally open PowerPoint and start typing.
Yeah.
They create their slide and their images and the ooh, ah, ah. But here's the thing: PowerPoint is not a negotiation preparation tool. There, I said it. It's
and I agree, because what I tend to classically see when we're putting people through, real play or simulations around negotiation, which I think is quite fascinating, is people tend to come from when you give them a scenario to negotiate. 100% of the time, particularly if they've had no real exposure to professional negotiating, they tend to come from only from their position. So they prepared their position and they're kind of like fairly fixed on that. It normally takes me about a day to knock out the idea that they're going to give their position away, because they kind of walk in with their position. This is my position. This is what my boss has agreed. This is how much we're prepared to pay for whatever it is, bang on the table. And it kind of that, for me, it's the biggest kind of no-no when we're negotiating. And I think we need to be, I always say to people, we need to try to start to, it's back to one of my Coveyisms, which is, seek to understand before you seek to be understood. So if you understand, if you can be lucky enough to get Darren's position or Dr. Anthony's position early part of the conversation, actually that's really useful to you as a negotiator, because you've got basically then, a very nice set kind of framework. So I know you have a really cool framework, Darren. Perhaps you could share that framework with us.
It's very simple. So there's a template available online, because we realized a long time ago that people needed a preparation tool, something simple, easy to understand, easy to use. And I've just drawn a part of it here, Andrew, so you can see it's a downloadable free template, and we call it the square dance. We've never quite understood why we call it that, but do-si-doing and all that seems to conjure up people.
That kind of works for me, Darren. That kind of works for me, yeah.
Sort of does, doesn't it? I mean, you've done a barn dance, and so have I. So
I have. I'm not sure I like it. I know. What are your thoughts on barn dances, Dr. Anthony? Any kind of thoughts on barn dances? Have you ever been to a barn dance in South Africa?
It took the wrong time to negotiate. Let Darren talk.
I'll do what the man said. So there's this A4 template we've created. Download it for free. It's all yours. And roughly it looks like this. What are you hoping for? What are you going to walk away with? But here's the bit that most people miss, apart from preparing. What are you prepared to give? And what are you prepared to take? Now, this left and right-hand column are absolutely essential. We call them the grease that keeps the negotiation engine turning. Most people hit a stalemate because they've either declared their position or got someone else's position and can't move forward. These and this help you to keep it moving forward. By completing this simple template, you have confidence in what's going to happen in your negotiation. Sorry, Andrew.
No. I think that's because it's almost my I have a very similar kind of model to you. So I always talk about my kind of my WAP or my walk away price when I'm negotiating. So I'm kind of clear about that in my head. I have my what I call my Zupa. So my Zupa is my zone of potential agreement.
Yeah,
and that's basically, and that's basically where I'm trying to work. And at the bottom of my Zupa, I tend to focus on my kind of walk away price, where basically there's no negotiation after that. Obviously, I'm hoping to go more to to go to my what I would call my best opportunity really. I want to get the most out of the negotiation, but I'm also kind of mindful of a few things. And I suppose probably one of the most important things for me is just the relationship when we're negotiating. So I think sometimes there are I think there's a whole piece around kind of moral standards around negotiation as well. Because even when I'm negotiating in the Friday market around the Ray bonds, I still kind of feel that the man who's selling me the Ray bonds still has to make a living. He has to feed his children. So I have a moral kind of like obligation. I don't know, perhaps everyone else has different values. I think one of the big things I always say to people when I'm working with, particularly helping people to negotiate, is don't believe that you have the same value set as Darren or Anthony. I would say that my value set is my value set. So you don't necessarily know what Anthony's value set is, or what Darren's value set is, or what the person you're negotiating with is. So be kind of mindful of that. But I do think we have a kind of a moral obligation as human beings to make sure that it's kind of mutual. And for me, a big part of that is developing the relationship, because even if you're buying the kind of Ray bonds, it's likely that in the future you might want to buy other Ray bonds or other merchandise from that store or that seller. So therefore, it's kind of beneficial to kind of like to build a relationship over time. That really kind of helps the negotiation process. So I'd be kind of keen to hear your thoughts on that. So we go to Dr. Anthony and ask, get your views, Dr. Anthony.
Yeah, for me, it's always about the answers in the question, and I believe that when you negotiate, number one, don't underestimate the person's values, because you don't know their background. And also, as you know, culture plays a vital role. However, if you respect one another and if you have the skill to purely be in agreement to ask a question, because you will realize the answer is in the question. Because all negotiation starts with how much. And you know when you're prepared to walk away, because you're not prepared to go to that deal. So I think it's that give and take, as Darren was saying, and I actually can see the square dance happening in my mind in terms of what do you want, when will you walk away, what will you give, what will you take, and how do you come to agreement. So I actually think it's simplistic, but you know what, Darren, it is powerful.
It is. It's very powerful. And there's only these outcomes. This is all there is. And the one I'd always advocate is win-win. Now, my win, I want a bit bigger than your win, but it's still win-win.
Because it's also one of the I'm mindful that there's this one of the most powerful human emotions, and it's well worth kind of flagging it here, and I'm definitely aware of it. Is just that emotion of revenge. So if there's a that's why I would generally encourage people to avoid positional negotiation, because and particularly right the way through the negotiation, because at the end of it, even if you kind of say, I'd have paid 35 bongs for the Ray-Bans or whatever, and actually and he says, well, I would have sold them for like 22 bongs, then you're kind of setting that kind of like that revenge thing going. And so because people want to then in the future kind of claw that money back. Now you could say, well, it doesn't matter because I'm in the Friday market and I'm never going to see the guy again. It doesn't really matter. But I still feel that it's important that you never ever kind of show your position. And one of the biggest reasons for that is revenge. Because if I feel that I've lost to you in some way, it doesn't matter what it is, then actually it's going to trigger that very, very powerful emotion. Thoughts on that? You're a psychologist, Dr. Anthony. Thoughts on kind of revenge as a powerful motivator?
It is a motivator. I mean, because the thing is, what is the underlying factor under the revenge? And I can tell you now, when it comes to money and to negotiation, often it is greed. And that's why people actually turn into revenge, because actually what was the real reason? Because remember, there's a conscious and the subconscious. In the subconscious was greed. and he doesn't even know he's being steered by it, and therefore their reaction is revenge.
Yeah, so Darren, any kind of thoughts on revenge and how we avoid revenge in negotiation?
Well, I'm going to flip it a slightly different way and hopefully still answer your question. There's a fantastic video online. It's animated. It's of a guy drawing. I think it's by Robert Cialdini. It's about 6 laws of persuasion. One of them is really, really important for negotiation. And there's a piece that he shows in it about the power of common ground. And in his example, it says it can be really simple. It might be you like crisps and I like crisps. So I'll bring that to life as a real life example. We're in Tenerife recently, and my son Jack is buying a pair of Ray-Bans. And I'm moaning about how hot it is, because I'm British. That's my right. And the guy behind says, you ought to know what it's like in Senegal, where I'm from. It's 49 degrees. We had a 2-3 minute chat about how hot it was. He thought it was cold. I thought it was hot. And Jack got a better deal because of it. Common ground is really important in negotiation, no matter how small.
Yeah, I would agree. I completely agree with you. I mean, I think actually it's building the relationship. And if you can do that, it's back to kind of mutual interests, really, because I think that's a really, really important point. It's kind of what I would call mutual gains. So the more that we kind of both feel that that's in Darren's scenario, that's the win-win, right? So Darren walks away from it and I walk away from it, and we both kind of feel that we've won. That's called collaboration. So there's that kind of that we're seeking kind of mutual gains from our negotiation, as opposed to Darren wins, I lose, he lets me know that I've lost, and that kind of triggers that emotion of kind of revenge, and I want to get back on him. So next time, it probably significantly damages my relationship. So how do we basically explore those mutual gains, Darren? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you asked me, how do you be a better negotiator? The next thing I'd share is this one. I'm just going to do one more drawing, unless you ask me to draw a butterfly or something, which will go horribly wrong.
Oh, we'd like to see a butterfly, I think. We'd much prefer to see a butterfly.
Is this one?
Next time.
So I'm going to put an eye at the end of this just to create a mnemonic. So this is the next part that we need to understand to be a better negotiator. These are the 4 stages of negotiation. Now, if you were to research it online, you'll see 4, 5, 6, 7 stages, but let's not make it too complicated. The bit that most people skip is the second one, explore. They go straight into their position, trying to negotiate on price, hitting stalemate. It's all gone wrong. We escalate it. The second stage of negotiation is explore. Ask a million questions to understand their position, understand them, understand what they want. And I'll give you a short example. So many years ago, I was looking for a new car. I'm on the forecourt of a car dealership, and I'm looking at a lovely 2-seater red sports car. The guy comes over, jabbers in my ear, 1 Vicar owner, 20,000 miles, blah, 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 blah. But he never stopped to ask me one question. I've got 3 kids. I'm looking for an SUV. The fact I'm dribbling over this sports car, I'm never going to buy it. So what he should have done is started with the second stage, which is E, explore and find out what I need.
And that's my that is my kind of one of my top tips for being successful in life. Genuinely, one of my top tips for being successful in life, because people often say, what I don't know why they ask me that question, by the way, just as a point of but I do get asked, particularly by graduates or undergraduates. I do a lot of work with universities, and they're often very curious, particularly around I find it fascinating. They seem to be fascinated by my job title, and because I think everyone wants to be it, whatever my job title is at the time. They all seem to want to be that, and so they asked me the question. What's the kind of? They always ask me, well, what are the hacks? Stocks, what are the kind of like, what are the cheap ways? What's the fast way to success? And I'm like, A, I don't think I'm very successful, but B, I think there are no hacks. I think there's no kind of shortcuts. I think there's only really hard work. But I always say to people, and it's back to your point, Darren, that in my mind, if I understand what other people need from me, and I'm able to give them what they need, actually, you can almost write your own check. So I think that's exploring, in that kind of relationship, you're exploring what people need from you. And it doesn't matter if you're a barista, if you're working in a restaurant, if you're working as whatever role you have. And it definitely applies in negotiation, because when you can understand what their needs are, and then you can match their needs against your product, And then, of course, there's that kind of magic word that I would use, which is yes. So, you ask them to explain what they're looking for from the sunglasses or the car or the bag or the holiday or the flight or whatever it might be. And then you listen and you're sort of paraphrasing and summarizing as you're kind of listening to and having that conversation. And then, of course, the real trick is then to match what you've heard. And as you're matching those needs with your solution, then kind of seeking that magic 3-letter word, which is yes. Because if you get lots of yeses, so if I'm selling Darren the pen and I'm getting lots of yeses, what effectively happens then is I get the yes. When I get to the final kind of like down, so do you want to buy the pen or do you want to buy the holiday? If he kind of, it's actually back to Cialdini and the 6 kind of like, the 6 sort of like facts of influence. If you want that book, guys, just ping me a DM and I can send you a copy of the book. I'd be delighted to do that. If basically at that point, if he said yes 17 times, because I've done a really good job listening to his needs and I've matched my product against his needs, it's almost impossible for him to say no. And if he does say no, then I'm basically overcoming those objections by kind of saying, by doing more exploratory work. My point here, it's a very long point, but if I really understand what Darren needs about the pen or what Darren needs about the red sports car or the vehicle or the holiday, and I then, make a really great compelling argument with how I'm matching against those needs, he's not going to really have any objections. He's just going to get his wallet out and buy the car, right? Or buy the holiday. So any thoughts on this, Dr. Anthony?
I just think what you're doing is saying exactly the way that it works, because the thing is, it's a process. Everything in life, like the marriage is a process. It's a process in terms of how life works, because A becomes for B in front of C, and there's a sequence A, B, C. And think if you're out of process, you want to jump from A to C, and you will never know what the value was of B. And what you've just described is knowing what you are wanting, and this, like, what is your wish and what you're prepared to walk away with. I think that fell right into that square dance that Darren just explained to us.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Anything you'd like to kind of add there, Dan? I'm kind of putting some top tips up on the screen as we're sort of speaking here, but Dan, any kind of additional kind of thoughts? Or
let's come back to what you said in relation to Pepsi. So we've got 4 stages of our negotiation, our structure. Prepare, where we use the square dance up here. Explore. So these 2, I crossed them out because most people jump to stage 3 and wonder why they hit stalemate. Once you've prepared and explored, you then propose and summarize. The I is just to make it an acronym. But they're the 4 stages of negotiation, and it's something that people need to understand when they're negotiating, to almost look up like a meerkat and think, okay, where am I now? I'm in the proposal stage. Okay, these are the behaviors I need to exhibit.
I always say to people, when you do get some agreement on something, it's almost like, particularly when it's very, very complex negotiation, I would say when you've got a piece where maybe 30 or 40 areas where you kind of need to agree, but each time you get some broad agreement on something, it's almost like taking that away from the negotiation, sort of putting it over to the right, and then you're kind of moving on the other 29 things you're sort of negotiating. So, and then slowly, and then kind of going back to, so we've agreed on these 5 things. Let's do a quick recap on the 5 things that we've basically agreed so far, and then basically let's move on to the 6th and 7th thing that we need to agree with. That's really, I think that's fantastic advice. But I think you're right. People just go, they go straight in, and they also I do a really fun activity with I don't have a pen to hand. I do have a pen. It's here, and often in works, I sort of throw a pen at someone. And I say, sell me the pen, and they just start talking about the pen. They don't dream of kind of like finding out what's of interest to me, finding a little bit about who I am, what would be important about the pen. They just throw the pen at me and they say, oh, well, this is a lovely pen. It's exquisitely made, yada, yada, yada. I don't care if it's exquisitely made. That's not one of my needs. So therefore you've almost kind of like broken the relationship before you start. If that makes it makes sense.
Can I just come in there, Darren? Isn't it just about the connection? Because if there's something that Stott is very good with, is actually to make the connection, the engagement with the person before he tries to sell anything, whether it be a dream or purpose. And I think that connection plays a role.
Well, I think so too. So you can tell I'm in a habit of writing these things, but I'm just going to do it because I think it will be interesting. There's a fantastic equation called the trust equation. not ours, one that's certainly in public knowledge. And what we need to create there is trust. Dr. Anthony, you're absolutely right. We've got to create trust. And trust is based on 4 parts: credibility, reliability, and intimacy. But all that can be killed if you're too self-orientated. So there's 4 parts to this murky trust relationship thing. So credibility, if you guys ask me about negotiation, you'd expect to have a decent answer, and I hope I am. Reliability, if you ask me to do something and I do it, I'm reliable. Intimacy is back to our common ground. I know a little bit about you, you know a little bit about me, but if I just waffle on about myself, trust is gone.
And trust, I think, is probably the most fragile thing, because you can't really recover it. And I suppose my kind of final kind of like tip really for this session is really about believing that their problem is their problem, because actually in a negotiation, whatever that problem is, it's a shared problem. We should be seeking a kind of mutual agreement to solve the problem. I think too often in negotiation, I've experienced, I see people just saying, well, that's not my problem, that's your problem, and of course that's not really going to help the negotiation at all. If I just kind of like throw my hands up and say, well, I don't really care, that's your problem, my this is my position, I'm fixed. I'm showing it. I mean, I was kind of mindful of when we're talking about negotiation, I always have this lovely story when my son was about 2.5 years old. I'd taken him swimming, and when I'd taken him swimming, it was like any sort of like 2.5-year-old. It was they get cold and they get hungry and they don't want to have a shower and they just want to have chips or whatever. So I remember sort of like getting him out of the pool, taking him downstairs. He was kind of kicking and screaming. He didn't want to leave the pool. It was freezing cold. But it's in the UK, so it's not in the Middle East where we live now. Freezing cold, somewhere in Suburban, and and he's kicking off, and all I'm basically bribing him with the idea that he's going to get some chips and some nuggets at the end of the experience. I'm a very bad father, but anyway, let's move on from that. And so but my point here is that I was then listening to a conversation that was happening in a cubicle next to me. So a similar father with a similar age child. And then the father basically, went back to kind of positioning, and he basically said these kind of immortal words, which have never ever left my mind. If you don't get in the shower and get dressed, we are never coming swimming again. Yeah. And as he said that, I thought, you have just lost, because at some point, unless he really doesn't want his, maybe puts his life in, his son's life in danger by not teaching him to swim. But at some point in the future, he's going to have to take his son swimming, right? And at that point, the child will know that the behavior that he's been exhibiting is basically going to work, because he can still get his own way. So I'm curious there must be something psychological about that. Well, why do children do that, Dr. Anthony?
It's because it's a lack of consequence management in parenting. And that is that if the child understands the consequence before the time, they will actually change their behavior. It's because we actually want to please them. We want to win their favor because we're scared they'll stop loving us. But if we do consequence management, that's true love.
Yeah, it's actually amazing. There's Darren, any kind of final thoughts? I'm conscious we're almost at the end of our show today. I think we've done some I think it's been very fascinating, actually, very, very fascinating conversation. Any kind of final thoughts?
I think one of the toughest parts of negotiation that we don't teach is the follow-up. Once we get the deal, so we're at stage 4 where we've summarized, everyone's agreed, then we walk away and the deal falls apart because we think we've summarized, but we haven't really done it very well, is follow-up and adding consequences. So if you don't deliver it by Monday, what happens? The invoice goes up by 2%. Adding those conditions and consequences are really important to achieve adherence to the deal you think you've got.
No, I think that's a really, really good point. I think people are sometimes afraid to ask for the deal as well. I've seen that a lot. I mean, they generally get fairly terrified. Why do you think people are so scared about asking for the deal, Anthony, particularly when we're negotiating?
Fear of failure. No one likes to fail.
It's the rejection. Yeah, it's kind of, I suppose it's the rejection, right? I think that's half the battle, because I've done a great job in listening and understanding what my needs are. I'm kind of matching it. I've done such a good job with my needs analysis. I'm doing really good now matching of those needs, and I pretty much won't have any objections to overcome. And then, unfortunately, time and time again, I see negotiators basically then kind of walk away without kind of setting a time frame. So I think it's worth just kind of recapping what you were just saying then, Darren, about setting a timeline for next steps.
It is. And also the reason we struggle is because it's conflict. Negotiation is conflict, haggling is conflict, and let's not make any bones about it. Conflict is hard. So what we need to do is get to stage 4 where we summarize the deal, and then what we're doing is adding conditions or consequences, which we discuss as part of the negotiation. The negotiation is not over. If we don't achieve X, Y, and Z that's in the deal that we have said we would, then what do we do?
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Let's just go back to obviously our 5 o'clock. We have a kind of question. Incredibly grateful and such an informative conversation. Dr. Anthony and Darren Smith, amazing today. Really enjoyed talking to you about this topic and this question. Just to remind you guys, we've been talking today about how can I be a better negotiator, and of course. We love your questions. You've had it on the ticker going below there. So we love your questions. But if you're listening to a recording or you're listening to us live, let us know. I know that Darren and Anthony and definitely myself, very responsive to those questions. So if you have anything you'd like to know, you want to know more about negotiation or some of the tools that Darren has in his toolkit, or know more about how kind of we can help you with negotiation, please kind of feel free to kind of reach out. We do, of course, have a magical kind of like time machine in the Weird Human podcast. So here's the question. So if I had we're kind of like, let's crank it up. Let's crank up the time machine, and we're going to go back then to when you were 18. So probably about, was it 2000 for you? Year 2000, Darren? You were 18, 2000?
Probably a bit less, maybe 20.
I'm curious actually, when were you 18? What year were you 18?
Let's see, born in 1971. So what was that? 1989.
Oh, you're 80s. You're 80s child. 80s. So you were living your best time when you're in the mid 80s.
Oh, I mean Tony Hadley, Gold, all
Wham.
Yeah, Wham. Adamant.
Oh, beautiful. So I've got my war paint on. I've got my jacket. I've actually got one of those jackets. It's really cool. I've got my jacket. I'm basically like, bopping away to Wham, wake me up before you go. I won't sing it for you. And we kind of like, we're in a bar somewhere, and I've taken you back to meet the 18-year-old Darren.
Yep.
Darren, kind of what advice would you offer?
Oh, on negotiation or just generally?
Just on life, my friend. Just on life.
Okay. Well, when I was working at a DIY store, so my advice is when you hold the 6-foot piece of wood and your colleague with the Stanley knife cuts it from top to bottom and gives you 80 stitches.
Ouch. That's really painful. And I can't, is that it? Just be careful when you're holding bits of wood so you don't get sliced, you have your hands sliced.
It's only advice for me because I can't.
Was it B&Q or Homebase? Was it B&Q or Homebase? Is what I want to know.
It was Homebase. I can't believe the idiot stood at the top and went to the bottom. By the time he got to the bottom, my thumb was on his head.
Ow. Now you're actually talking to Dr. Anthony, who is also the dubious kind of privilege of being shot. So that was kind of his opening kind of gambit when I first met Dr. Anthony. He's telling me about being shot, and we had a great conversation about what it felt like to be shot. But what Dr. Anthony is really gifted at is kind of writing an acronym or a mnemonic of kind of negotiation. So very, very keen to kind of hear what that is. So let me just put my last point up, and then I'm going to get ready with my keyboard now to type. He's kind of like I think we're on negotiation today, aren't we, Dr. Anthony? So what's your acronym today?
Okay, it will be the word negotiate. The N will be for nerve, because let's face it, you need to have the nerve to follow through because you're nervous in starting off to negotiate anyway. Then the E, it's all about the expectation that you actually get into, because like Darren said, it's what do you wish for, but when are you prepared to walk away? So the expectation needs to be bottled up. Then the G is for guard. Guard yourself from judging the situation. Guard yourself from judging the person, because you're not going to get anywhere if you actually judge them beforehand. The O, outcome. If you are not negotiating with an outcome based in mind, that means you're actually just messing around and you're haggling. You're not negotiating. The T is for talking. Now, we understand that you either take or you don't, because there's give and there's take. So remain talking, otherwise you are not negotiating, because when the person turns around and walks away not talking, you're not negotiating anymore. The I is interest. Be involved in their interest. Don't just go for positioning. of what your position is. It's taking an interest in the person, taking an interest of the process that is taking place. The key is agreement, because when you can actually get to agreement, you are negotiating with a purpose that actually did work. The T, tango, because that's a square dance template that Darren was speaking about. Go for the tango, because you want to make sure when you negotiate, you go for the square dance template and you put it to work. And then lastly, the E, efficiency. If you've learned today how to negotiate better, make sure that you're efficient next time when you do negotiate. That's me.
That is absolutely awesome. I've got to ask you, do you tango? Do either of you tango? I just love it. Is it it's Sense of a Woman, isn't it? I love the scene in Sense of a Woman where they're kind of like, is it tango? I think that is a tango, isn't it?
Tango is good. Tango is sort of facing off, but rumba is better.
Yeah. See, now I'm ashamed. I probably do I can do a bit of a disco, you know.
Back to the 80s, I used to break dance. Does that count?
Oh my gosh! You don't fancy showing us a bit of break dancing now, do you, Darren?
Oh, if only there was the time.
And on that devastating news, just a massive thank you to everyone who listens to us. We really appreciate it. My beautiful, very incredible friend, Darren Smith from Sticky Learning. If you need anything from Darren, just reach out and ask him. You can obviously leave your details, direct message him, or you can basically, he got some brilliant cards. I've been collaborating with him around some fantastic service cards recently. So so make sure you and I need those cards because I want to be plugging them to my team. I was talking to a bank a couple of days ago, and they were fascinated by that concept. We're talking about customer service. There's an idea for a question. Dr. Anthony, I love you, my friend, as always. Speak to you all guys very soon. Take care. Stay safe out there.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Darren.
Bye.
Take care.